in that area. So the encroachment or the closeness, proximity, if you will, of that structure on the neighbors is going to be eliminated, and instead you're going to have Terconnel Park's driveway and area there as well. Is that correct?
Correct. And the landscaping, the buffer, and the fencing.
So let's take a look then at the proposed perspective, if you will, of Terconnel viewed from Plain Street.
So this actually shows again, from Plain Street, from the backyards on Plain Street, what you would see of the Terconnel Park project. And as Mr. Weber was saying, the face of the majority of the Terconnel Park project is approximately 80 feet off of the property line, which we had discussed at the last hearing. The portion that's all the way on the right-hand side, that is approximately 35 feet from the property line.
And when you say over, that's by the Plain Street property, the 5 Plain Street?
That is
the
correct.
35 foot?
Yes. And this is illustrating the board-on-board fence. That was the change that was made in response to the discussion with the neighbors. And then you're also seeing the landscaping sort of behind that fence.
So the landscaping will be on the Terconnel Park side?
That is correct.
And it'll be exposed to the southern sun?
Yes.
And the setback on the side yard for Terconnel Park from the Promenade, my plans show it at 44 feet. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that house that we had referred to previously, which sits right on the rear lot line, that's going to be removed, and instead there's going to be a 44-foot wide area that is not going to be encumbered by a building.
That is correct.
On this picture, just for a quick moment, Mr. Hardy, the landscaping that sits behind the fence, I assume that's a relatively mature planting, kind of in its, new form. In
Yes.
its mature state, do we expect those plantings to grow?
Mr. Worry, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman?
All right,
Yes.
Mr. Word, I got a lot of testimony coming.
And I will say we did it at the moment they were planted, I guess intentionally to show the
And I appreciate it looks like it's a winter foliage. There is no foliage.
Right,
To get a
right.
full perspective.
yes. So,
And then at this point, we're going to walk through the comments of the board's professionals, Krista Anderson's comments and then Mr. Dewar's comments. I know that the chair had said about a half hour, and we're at our half hour, so I'll be guided by the chair's discretion.
If you wouldn't mind, we'd love to take a brief recess.
Sure.
And then we'll return for the additional testimony. 5 minutes on the clock. not quite 5 minutes, but we'll take it. Mr. Weber, you may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, before we continue with Ms. Doherty's testimony,
Yes.
since we have all the exhibits in now for setting up the comparable mass, the views of Plain Street, there's also a drone video. And I think it would be appropriate at this point to incorporate that into the board's review of this project. It's around 2 minutes long, so I would ask that the board allow us that. And this would have been taken within the past 2 weeks, and I can aver that it accurately depicts what it shows.
Any narration, Mr. Weber?
There is no narration. Unless you want me to narrate, this is looking at sunrise.
Close my eyes and imagine.
This is in the back of Sunrise?
This is from the Smythe Volvo property.
Okay, so side, okay.
Now it's looking down Morris Avenue toward the center of Summit. River Road's in the foreground. The site of Terconnel Park is highlighted in the foreground before the Promenade. S3 is on the right-hand side. S4, which is also under construction, and then you have the BMS parking garage. You're now looking across the Passaic River into Chatham. There's the bend in the river. Now you're looking back into Summit, and this is the Summit Chatham Road area, where Summit also has its DPW yard. We're looking at River Road, and now we're coming into the Plain Street, Mealy neighborhood. This is the view of Plain Street, the Promenade, S2. S2 is the pyramidal building next to S3. That is scheduled to be demolished. And now you have that is the drone, and that gives you a sense of the area relative to the surrounding properties on Morris River Road and then Plain Street.
Is this A7? Sorry, just to be a stickler for process.
This is probably not on my list, right? It's not
We're gonna have to revise the list. We'll call it A7 because it's next, I guess.
Just want to mark it later.
Or you wanna mark it later.
You want to mark it, just mark it with an A. What is it, A415,
A15, okay.
if you don't mind?
Yep.
There are many.
Then,
And then I saw some members of the interested public trying to capture a video of that. We'll get the recording and we'll do our best to post it online to the zoning board's website. Yes, Ms. Gagnon, real quick.
Actually was looking for what the property would look like after it was done from the views of the different angles.
Okay. I don't know if that's part of your
We can't
exhibit,
do
but
that, no.
that's fair. Thank you, Ms. Gagnon. Okay, thank
I
you.
would ask that Nancy Doherty be recalled. And if we can go to the comments, Ms. Alfonso of Krista Anderson in the most recent set. I don't know if those are available to be put up on the monitor.
Give me a minute.
And Ms. Doherty, have you had an opportunity to review the report of Krista Anderson dated May 9th, 2022 in connection with the review of this application?
I have.
And she indicates whether or not the COA units have been distributed.
Yes, they have, and she notes that.
And then would you just go ahead?
Sure. The second point here was that there was a question about whether all the units have washers and dryers, and yes, they do, including all of the COA units. So they are indicated, but they're not all labeled. But every unit has a washer and dryer. The next item that was relative to the architectural aspects would be number 4. And that had to do with the signage. And as Mr. Weber mentioned before, the signage will all now be 30 inches high, including the tree. So times 300 inches long, so that's a total of 62.5 square feet. And all of the letters and the graphics will be compliant with a maximum height of 30 inches tall. Krista had a question about whether the number and the tree graphics would all be of the same materials, and the answer to that is yes. And the intention is everything will be backlit in the same manner. So it will be consistent between the Terconnel Park name, the tree, and the letters. And the numbers, excuse me. As noted by Krista, the numbers are not included in that 62.5 square feet because they're not required to be included in that number. Her next item in item 5 had to do with the lighting. Just to reiterate, the lighting, the type D fixtures will not be uplit. That's also provided in the civil engineering testimony that will follow. And the other question was just the trellis fixtures, which were mentioned before. Those fixtures are just downlight fixtures, and they will be concealed within the structure of the trellis. So they're 9.5 inches high, and the trellis members are 12 inches high. And then item 6 on Krista's memo had to do. Yes.
I think there was one other comment that Krista had on the required lights on the balconies. All of those lights on the balconies here are required, right?
That is correct. We are required to have one light on those balconies, and they're type J fixtures, and they are shielded fixtures, so they just throw light down, and there's one at each balcony.
Ms. Alfonso, can you go back to A9, just so the board members can have an opportunity to see the particular fixtures that Ms. Doherty is referring to when she talks about D?
When you say the balconies, you're talking about the usable balconies, not the Juliet balconies.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay, just
Yes,
wanna
there
confirm
are
that.
no lights at the Juliet balconies, correct.
And you said it's type J?
It's type J at the balconies.
I don't know what's- That's the middle one here, right?
Yes, that's right.
And then previously you had indicated a type D.
So
And can we show the type D as well?
Sure.
One more over. And
When
one
it's
more.
loading,
Okay, there it is.
gets slow.
And that was where Krista had asked whether or not that would be uplit, and you're testifying that that will only be downlit.
That is correct,
But it's a translucent glass.
around the front of it. Yes. So I think that, I think the last item was the building height. There was a question about the elevator penthouse or appurtenance, and our drawings show 42 feet plus 15 feet to the top of the elevator appurtenance. So I believe it's actually 57 feet. And I'm not sure if the 55.79 feet that's indicated here was to
So
Some-
when
some
you
other-
say indicated here, you're saying that in Krista's comments in paragraph 6, the last sentence, she says the proposed height measure from the grade plane to the elevator penthouse is 55.79 feet. So she's come up with a lower number than you.
That's
You're
correct.
saying you're at 57.
Yes, I would like to say it's 55.79, but we haven't had a chance to verify with Krista, and from average grade, to the top of the roof is 42 feet, and 15 feet for the elevator appurtenance is 15 feet, so...
Mr. Chairman, we're going to be returning, and at that point, there will be the opportunity to speak with Ms. Anderson and reconcile this discrepancy.
Thank you.
If
So-
I could ask you to look at the report of Chris Stewart.
Mhm.
And that is the report that is dated May 10th, 2022.
Sure.
And Mr. Chairman, again, you've heard me say it before, but your board professionals have all taken the time to review these revised plans, which, as the board members themselves know, are significant, together with the various reports that have been provided, and have been able to respond in time for this board to have the reports available and for our witnesses to have them as well in order to be able to provide answers that are direct and responsive. So it bears repeating, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate it. Mr. Dewar's comments.
Yes.
Item 10.
So item 10 was a question about the base site plan and the existing structures. I believe we've spoken about that a bit, and I believe there's also the civil engineer will have something that, there was something in the updated civil engineering drawings. So.
Item 16.
Yep, item 16 had to do with the solar installation, and again, the drawings were updated to, which are mentioned here, and then there was a question about space for the inverters and the controllers / meters, and all of that would be contained within the fenced-in area that has the 4-foot board-on-board fence. And if there will be batteries, again, they would all, anything related to the solar would be within that enclosure. Sure. Hold on. Okay, 19 had to do with the emergency generator, and I know there was a question about, there is, it actually says exhaust on the lower level plan. That actually is just an air intake. The exhaust is definitely going up through the roof and comes out in the appurtenance up on the roof. So I think that's the answer to that.
If I can, Mr. Chairman, we've addressed the fact that all amenities will be available to COA units.
That's correct.
The HVAC exhaust grills you've talked about, lighting information you've addressed, light levels at the top on the roof.
Right, so the light levels, the fixtures on the roof, as I was describing before, everything will be 3000 K in terms of the temperature. The lumen levels I do have for all of the fixtures on the roof. Everything is either shielded or pointing directly down, so I know there was a question about potential glare outside the property, and that will not be an issue. Do you want me to read through these?
I handed the lumen schedule that you're referring to Mr. Dewar just now, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. He's reviewing this at this point. I would ask that Ms. Dougherty continue with her architectural responses to his letter.
Okay, so that was 28 relative to, 27 was, well, we've gotten a bit, 27 had to do with the HVAC, which was, there was a question about the HVAC at the mezzanines. There are 2 grills shown on Morris Avenue, and those are to address the HVAC at the mezzanine level, which will be within the parking structure. So that has been already vetted with our MEP engineer.
What's an MEP?
Mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineer.
Thank you.
28, so the terrace balconies, which we spoke to before, those will be those shielded type J fixtures, 1 at each of the balconies, the resident balconies. 29, we just spoke about the light levels,
And this is something also that the civil engineer will be addressing?
That is correct.
In terms of the photometric study that they performed?
That is correct. Number 31, which had to do with, again, with lighting. I think we've covered all of this. There was a question about the hours of operation on the roof, and I know that Mr. Flanagan already testified to that, and the light levels and the glare from the rooftop amenities.
And the fence that surrounds or is on 2 sides of the dog run, the other fence is open and it's chain link, and there are parapet lights there as well that will illuminate the dog run, correct?
That is correct. And I think, and then I think the last question was number 50, which had to do with whether there might be televisions, and this was under the additional comments, and I think the answer is there may be televisions in the future, and they're not included at the moment on the rooftop. Under no circumstances would they be, intended to have an impact on the neighbors or honestly the residents within the building. But there will be no sound system, so that is correct.
Well, there's no sound system independent of the proposed television.
That's correct. And I think that was all of the specific questions.
I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dower, did they fairly represent your report?
There's, I guess my question regarding the screening that you're providing around the dog run, we seem to be spending a lot of time on the dog run, but was any reason why it was just 2 sides versus all 4 sides?
I think so that there could be visibility from outside the fencing, and
Okay.
also for the light, so that the light that is being provided on the parapet would provide light into the dog run.
So is there a reason to have lighting on the outside of the dog run where you have it screened? Is there any reason to have that lighting at this point if it's not going to shine through that screening?
That's a great question. So we probably could remove it on those 2 sides. That's a very well.
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's adequate, we don't want to, again, we're spending time on the dog run, but you want to have adequate lighting for the dogs.
So you've brought up the screen of A9, Ms. Alfonso, and what is being eliminated are the wall sconces on the parapet to the north and then to the west.
Correct.
So facing Plain Street and then facing River Road.
Another question
So
I
could you
have,
mark those, Ms. Alfonso, if you understand which ones those are, and surrounding the dog run?
Right.
we talked about the different textures on the rooftop, with
Yes.
tiling,
Yep.
and is everything going to be flush and ADA accessible? For
Sure.
all of the areas?
Well, so the raised portion will be accessible. So where the pavers are,
Right.
so the TPO roof will actually be lower than that, because when we come out of the elevators, we have to be flush, if you will.
Right.
So, I don't know if that answers
So,
the
well, I
question.
mean, but everything else, as far as people, as far as anybody in a wheelchair or with a walker or.
Yes,
can't-
will all
they'll
be
have-
flush.
Okay, but they'll have access to everything.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right. So, so the portion around the perimeter is lower, right? Because the TPO, the pavers will be above the TPO roof.
Right,
Because they'll sit on top of the roof.
but yeah, but there'll be some type of not a ramp, but some type of a gradual transition to get on those built-up areas.
The people anybody using the roof will only be on those pavers.
Oh, okay, I guess I was misunderstanding that.
Yeah, and so there are portions, the inaccessible portions on the roof plan where it says TPO roofing are all outside sort of the boundaries
Okay.
of the accessible portion, if you will.
Okay.
So right then, Ms. Doherty, you were referring to A9 in your discussion with Mr. Dewar. And
Yes.
previously on the video, the areas that have been circled by Ms. Alfonso show the type of barriers in order to prevent people from going onto the TPO, but staying within the available amenity.
That is correct.
And then in terms of the lighting that's going to be eliminated, Ms. Alfonso has only marked off a couple of those. There's other fixtures that are strewn across that wall, but they just aren't designated as the particular age and exactly.
Right.
So all those would be, well, no, the ones on that side that faces to the south, those have to be retained. There we, and one, I think we have the idea, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We do.
We do.
Right.
Do we need to retain this copy? Sorry, Mr. Ward, we're just talking about how we appreciate your efforts and Ms. Alfonso's efforts to make these notations live. Thank you, Sam. There you go. All right, we saw that a screen grab was just taken, so that'll be entered into the record for future reference.
Thank you.
Anything further, Mr.
I
Dowd?
don't think I have any further questions, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Excellent. Mr. Snectus, anything you'd like
Chairman,
to add?
yeah, just a few quick questions. Regarding the rooftop, while we're up there, you had indicated there's a barrier in between all the planters to keep people from going towards the parapet area. How high will that be? You'll have a 42-inch high, or how high will the planters be?
So the planters are 26 inches to the top of the planters above the paving, and then the plants will be above that, obviously.
But there's little barricades between that as well, obviously for, I guess, little children or anything like that to get too close to the parapet itself. Is that intended? Is there little barricades?
Yes, so that those will be either glass or some other material to prevent people from going in between those planters out to the parapet.
Okay. And what will occur near where the fire access doorway is? Is that also intended to be another division? I'm not
It is.
sure you had one there or not.
So that again will be lower, and to your point, there will be a division. It's shown as a single line, but the line there will be a barrier.
And then also by the trellis area, the trellis area, there'll be a seating area, I guess, that will separate it from the parapet?
There is a seating area that will be underneath that trellis.
Okay. And that'll sort of form a barrier for someone going towards the parapet itself as well?
Yes.
Okay. I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, I can't recall, but was there a study done of the first floor, or the lowest elevation of the garage area, whether or not that was calculated as a story above grade?
Oh.
Did anybody look at that? Did the engineer be testifying to that? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Questions from members of the board? The architect? Go ahead, Scott.
Did you consider any kind of elevatoring system that would reduce the overrun or eliminate it?
I don't know of any system that would allow us to do that. We have to have those two elevators, we have to have,
Right.
excuse me, one of those elevators going up there. So,
We did try though to lower the
Yeah,
height of it, Nancy, we talked
right,
about
they,
it how many
they pushed
times.
on it. We may be able to come down 6 inches, but we're using sort of the most conservative number right now.
Right.
We have to get the hoist beam up there and some other things in that overrun. So we did look at it, and, we've reduced it down to one of those elevators that has to come up there, so that's where we got to the 100 square feet.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Any other questions from members of the board? The only thing on my mind is the solar panel array, which is understood not to be included within this application. Though, to the best of your knowledge, maybe Mr. Weber, I'll start with you. What approvals would be necessary should the Flanagans or some future owner decide to proceed with the installation of solar? Would it come before the zoning board, in your opinion, or simply be subject to building approvals that the municipality would manage?
I think if the board allows that to be established as a solar field, so if the board approves this application, says, okay, we're going to recognize this area as a solar array field, subject to future construction, then I think we would not have to come back, but we would just be subject to construction code requirements.
I offer that as a note as we consider the visual impact of that solar field. We haven't seen any even hypothetical renderings of what that could look like in terms of both visual impact from the roof, but also potentially from the surrounding properties. I can't imagine the impact is substantial, but we haven't seen anything represented. So I just offer that to you as an observation.
That's a good point, Mr. Chairman, and I could see that the board has all recognized that. They're curious about that as well. We have the second hearing coming in beyond this hearing, and I think that's an answer that we should have available for the board.
Thank you very much.
I will just add that the Flanagans, we have discussed it preliminarily, and the intention is that the panels would be below that 4-foot board-on-board fence. It is shown on the elevations. We have noted the height of that 4 feet, so just, so.
That's my assumption.
Yeah.
But if we
Right.
could, offer some kind of testimony as to the types of solar arrays that
Right.
could be positioned on that roof, understandably 10 or 15 years from now, that technology could change significantly and we couldn't anticipate that, but some testimony would be helpful.
Very
Scott
good.
had a question. Yeah.
Mr. Weber, I appreciate your summary of the contextual surrounding properties. Would it be possible to make a similar request, maybe see if there's one or two examples of projects of a similar scale in Summit that don't have retail at the ground floor, just resi from ground up, and maybe include a little bit about their context as well, if they're adjacent to retail or something like that?
Very good, we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'll offer any member of the interested public the opportunity to ask questions of this witness. Only questions. Mr. Nelson?
Bear with me, my phone's getting ready to die. I wrote everything on my phone. In regards to the dog, Don Nelson, 20 Plain Street.
Thank
In regards to the dog run, the fencing is chain link fence with, I don't know what they call it. They put the cloth inside. Is that all the way around?
So the fence itself is black vinyl coated, so chain link, that's correct. And then it has not with it's not with the strips going through it, it's sort of a mesh that would be on one side of it.
And that's only enclosed on two sides?
That's correct.
Just curious as to why we didn't enclose the whole thing on all, or at least three sides, to prevent, I guess River Road's not so much of a big deal, but Plain Street obviously is, and I believe you've already done that. But then I guess it would be the east side of the building, facing the promenade?
Right.
Why not enclose that as well, so that the noise doesn't go up to the neighboring buildings or the neighboring residential properties? That's, from what I understand, that's open chain link fence.
Right. I mean, I think they would be willing to
Good,
consider that.
good. And then you mentioned something about TVs being on the roof, and then there was discussion about a sound system. Is there a sound system separate from the TVs?
No,
No?
I
Okay.
apologize. if I was
Okay, yeah, it kind of came across that way. And one of the things that I'm curious about, and maybe this is not your area of expertise, and I spoke to one of the owners back there. The Promenade has an exhaust system in their parking garage, and every time a car enters the parking garage, it goes on. As a neighbor, I hear it. And several years ago, and I think you represented him. Oh, no, you didn't represent him. I came before the council to have an ordinance introduced into town that noise cannot leave the property. If you rent a house in Cape May, your noise cannot leave the property. So that went nowhere. So what I'm asking is there some consideration so that if there's a ventilation system in the underground parking garage, that noise does not leave the property? I think it was Kevin said it would probably go up through the roof, but is there a way to make sure that that's the way it's going to work?
If I can, Mr. Chairman, respond to that. And we have the civil engineer, the architect will also indicate that the exhaust or the intakes, right, are on River Road and on Morris Avenue, and that there's none proposed on facing Plain Street or the Promenade.
That is correct.
So
Okay,
that is a good point, Mr. Nelson, and one that the architects had anticipated.
Okay, and then, I don't know if this is the right time to ask this question, garbage pickup. Is there facilities on site for garbage pickup? And will there be not a 6 a.m. pickup? You know, is there some consideration on, maybe this isn't the right time to ask that question?
No, it's good.
But,
Mr. Flanagan, can you address the proposal with regard to trash and recycling? What you're proposing, it'll be a private contract or is it going to be municipal?
Mr. Flanagan, would you mind just coming back up to the table so we can
Ah.
capture the response on the mic?
Mr.
Thank you.
Flanagan, would you come back up? And I've just asked you, can you describe who you're going to hire as a garbage contractor? And as a result, in response to Mr. Nelson's point, when are you going to have that contractor coming onto your property?
We haven't selected the contractor, but it will be a private hauler. And they will be, we don't want them disturbing our tenants. So
Correct,
they're not going to be disturbing you
Okay.
either.
okay, good.
But it'll get picked up at least 3 times a week. And all the garbage is contained inside the building.
And I don't know if this is, I guess I can't phrase this as a question, so I'll leave that till later on. Thank you very much.
Any other members of the
You know
interest?
what? Let me try.
Give it a shot. You came in.
No, not so much for you. When you're comparing properties, why would you include S3, which I believe is a research facility, not a residential property. And then I heard light, LI, which I think is light industry. No disrespect to this board, but the funeral home, the assisted living center was shoehorned into that property. Sorry about that, went the wrong way. That was shoehorned into that property. You have to admit that.
Well, let's
Okay?
let Mr.
So my
Weber
question is, why would you use those properties when you're not really comparing apples to apples? You're comparing a residential structure to a light industry and research, and I guess the Volvo dealer is a neighborhood business, or maybe not, I don't know. So you're really not, like, when you do a tax assessment, you don't compare when you do an appeal, you have to use the same type of property. You're not doing that in this scenario.
This is an answer that's best provided by the planner.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Nelson.
I have a couple questions. So I apologize if you did the drone video for me. I'm
Sorry, Ms. Gagnon, just your name and address.
Dory Gagnon, 27 Bedford Road. I really appreciate that. I'm a very visual person, and my husband hates me for it. So when we do projects, I have to see everything out. So I thank you for it. It was much appreciated. And looking at all the architectural renderings, is it possible to see them in color and what they would look like done? Do you have those by any chance? Instead of black and white and just...
When the original perspectives were done, great detail was put into presenting those, and anticipation of this hearing, there were constraints in terms of getting all of the exhibits, the plans revised, and everything into the board. Time constraints, as well as budgetary, really provided a stopgap against us being able to get that done.
Okay, so no.
Do you anticipate those being revised for the next hearing, Mr. Weber?
I had talked with the architects about whether or not they could pencil the sketch in, but with the new electronic media, you can't just color in. It's something that provides a little bit more of a challenge. I suppose we can ask them if they can.
Maybe not the full set, Ms. Gagnon, are there particular perspectives or visuals
Well,
that you would find helpful to understand?
I think that, like, just looking at them, you know, living across from Oratory, there were some things that when it was finalized, I didn't get to see beforehand. So I think as a resident, just seeing what it looks like as the final picture beforehand is always helpful. So when I was talking about, you know, just that corner access, before, one of the pictures you put on before, see, I didn't realize that you were keeping the, all of the cars in front, that lot right in front to park, I guess the used car lot. So that was something I learned today, that used car lot is gonna stay. I thought that was all going. So just understanding the demographics around that area is important to understand the space. The other thing, the hydraulic system, I forgot to mention, the noise of the hydraulics is really important. And for people who don't understand that, it makes a lot of noise going up and down, it clicks really loud. And the only reason I know that is because I have a lift system. So my question for you is, how are you gonna handle the noise with the hydraulic lifts going up and down all day long for the neighbors specifically behind?
Objection as to whether or not it constitutes any noise. If there's a question as to whether, what sound it produces, we can have that answered.
Okay, so do I ask the question of, does the hydraulic lift system make any noise first?
Starting point. Mr. Flanagan, maybe you want to answer that, or Mr. Weber, whomever else you'd like from your team.
You're up
Need to
again,
come back up.
Mr. Flanagan.
Get your steps in.
All right. The lift system is not very noisy at all, especially coming down. When they come down, it's pretty much just a little release of air. When they go up, there's a motor noise, but this is also going to be in the basement. So there's going to be little to no noise leakage out of that basement.
Okay, so another question for you. Is it how far underground are we going in the basement?
We're back to Nancy.
It's nearly 20 feet.
Oh,
19
okay.
feet.
That's
Yeah.
good to know.
19 feet, 6 inches or something like that.
21 feet altogether underground from the highest point.
Okay, so when cars are coming out, And will they be exiting, looking onto Plain Street with their lights?
No.
We have a question, and we have the civil engineer ready to address that.
Okay. And then I have a question about the plantings on the back when you showed the picture from Plain Street looking out. Is that a question for you with the plantings?
I mean, it's really with civil engineering testimony, with the plantings.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe, Mr. Weber, just a thought. You've done a good job in terms of trying to capture the light impact on the site. I don't know if there's some comparable, I wouldn't call it a study, that's a stretch, some summary of the noise that would be expected to be emitted from the site, the hydraulic lifts, HVAC, elevator on the rooftop, I don't know, whatever that might be. If you could provide some kind of summary of that. With respect to the hydraulic lifts, for example, maybe provide some example of a comparable sound that folks that aren't around hydraulic lifts may be able to relate to, instead of just decibel ratings, for example. Just may be able to answer some of these questions. And then for the example of the hydraulic lifts, what the impact of that is 20 feet down below grade. I think it'll be unnoticeable, frankly, for the folks in Plain Street.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. Mr. Nelson, for you, one more question. That's right. Thank you.
Don Nelson, Plain Street. When you mentioned about the elevator bulkhead, is the elevator cable driven or hydraulic? So that the shaft goes into down that 21 feet? Okay, so would that, since it's hydraulic, you still need to have that overrun on the top? You do? Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other members of the interested public? Yeah, questions are welcome.
Since I haven't talked yet.
What's your name and your address first?
Jack
and your
Hakeem,
question.
5 Plain Street.
Thank you.
So, I work from home about half the time. So I'm still bothered by the salesman hitting the panic button to find their cars. I'm right there. So I'm really concerned about noise. Is it possible to put some type of sound barrier or maybe some very high trees that live through winter and summer? I'm not familiar with plants. To help with sound and sight, because I'm also concerned about people on the rooftops just having a good time there with the noise. And my bedroom looks right into the building. I'm in the back, my bedroom's in the back, and I don't appreciate everybody looking down at me and talking and having a good time when I'm trying to sleep.
I'll just pause you right there. Do you think you'd be able to provide additional testimony on the impact of sound from this proposed?
That's what, I understand that, Mr. Chairman. And in response to the question about the landscaping, civil engineer.
Okay. So more from the civil engineer, and then there'll be additional testimony on noise in the likely next hearing.
Okay,
Thank you for your question. Anyone else care to answer the question? No? Ask a question? All right. With that, thank you, Ms. Doherty.
I would ask that Mr. Worry be called to the stand, to be sworn in. He has not testified before, and be heard by the board.
I was hoping.
And if you could raise your right hand. Can you hear me? Yes. If you could raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And please state your name, spell your last name.
Sure, it's Joshua Weary, W-I-R-R-Y.
Thank you. Can you briefly describe your background, experience, and 3 boards you've appeared before recently?
Sure, I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I graduated from New Jersey Institute of Technology with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. I'm a project manager at Dynamic Engineering, located in Chester, New Jersey, and I've testified before various boards throughout New Jersey. The most recent this year include Woodland Park, Little Falls, Totowa, and Phillipsburg.
Thank you. Any questions from the board, or would you like to accept his credentials?
We'll accept your credentials. Welcome.
Thank you. Ms. Alfonso, if we could start off with our first exhibit entitled Aerial Overlay.
A couple questions first, Mr. Worry. Are you familiar with the application that's currently before the board?
I am, yes.
And how did you achieve that familiarity?
Well, we've been working on the site plans for over the last year or so. I've been to the site several times. So really over the past year, we've been really reviewing these plans.
And are you familiar with the City of Summit and the Development Regulations Ordinance of the City of Summit?
Yes, I am.
And if so, how did you achieve that familiarity?
And again, during the process of preparing the site plans, we've thoroughly reviewed the DRO regulations of the City of Summit.
And did you author that litany of the regulations on the set of plans, and not just a list of variances, but I'm talking about at page 3, where you put together this schedule of all the regulations affecting this property? Is that your handiwork?
Yes, I did.
I would submit, Mr. Chairman, that he is familiar with the DRO of the city of Summit.
Very small notes, I'm not sure anyone will be able to see them, but
Actually, Mr. Alfonso, the first exhibit's aerial overlay,
Okay.
which is the, just essentially the rendering over the aerial. There we go. Okay, so this is our first exhibit tonight, which I kind of got lost in what number we're at. It might be A16 or 17.
we're gonna go back to our A7 or A9.
The aerial is A9.
Thank you.
Okay, so mark is A9 for the record. It's dated with today's
Thank
date.
you.
No problem. Dated with today's date of May 16th, 2022, at a scale of 1 inch equals 40 feet, and north is to the top left corner of the page. Now, this is an aerial image of the surrounding area with the proposed development overlaid and the property outlined in yellow. The property is located near the northeast intersection of Morris Avenue and River Road, which are both county roadways. And the property consists of 5 lots, specifically identified as Block 404, lots 5 through 9, which will be consolidated into one lot under proposed conditions. Now, as for the surrounding uses, across from Morris Avenue to the south is Bristol Myers Squibb. To the west is a paved parking lot utilized by the Volvo dealership Beyond. To the north are residential dwellings along Plain Street. And to the east is the Promenade mixed-use development. Now, the property is currently developed with 4 residential dwellings and a commercial building with 4 existing curb cuts along Morris Avenue. In addition, the property closest to River Road also includes a large paved parking area. These existing improvements will be demolished under proposed conditions. The property is located within the Neighborhood Business Zone, or NB Zone, which runs along this side of Morris Avenue and extends along River Road. The entire property is approximately 1.15 acres. An important feature of the site is the topography. There is a significant grade drop across the site of approximately 12 feet that slopes down toward River Road. And due to the existing topography, portions of existing steep slopes, which are areas that are greater than 15%, will be disturbed and regraded under proposed conditions, which will require variance as more than 1,000 square feet of disturbance is proposed. Now, a majority of these steep slopes are located in the grass areas in front of the building due to the existing slope along Morris Avenue. However, the project will comply with the state standards of Soil Conservation District during the entire length of construction, which includes measures such as silt fencing, seeding, and stabilization. In addition, the project received certification from the Somerset Union Soil Conservation District, which reviewed and approved our plans. Lastly, under existing conditions, stormwater generated by the site simply sheet flows towards the intersection of Morris Avenue and River Road, which will be greatly improved under proposed conditions, which we can discuss in more detail shortly. Now, if the board doesn't have any questions on the surrounding uses or existing conditions, we can move on to the next rendering. So we'll bring up site plan rendering. Now, this is dated again with today's date of May 16th, 2022, at a scale of 1 inch equals 20 feet, and north is again to the top left corner of the page. This exhibit is a rendered version of the site plan that was submitted, and as previously testified, the applicant proposed to construct a 52-unit multifamily residential building, which consists of 3 floors of residential and an underground parking garage. The NB zone only permits residential uses above the first floor, so we're technically a non-permitted use as we are not providing commercial uses on the first floor. Now, a majority of the L-shaped building is pushed towards the roadway at approximately 86 feet away from the rear property line. There is a small portion of the building in the top left corner closest to River Road. That's approximately 33 feet away from the rear property line. Now, as for access and circulation, per discussions with the adjacent property owner, the site plans were recently revised to provide additional clearance from our proposed driveway to the existing driveway for the Promenade development. For clarity, the previous plans provided 8 feet of separation between the driveways, while the latest plans you see here provide approximately 26 feet of separation, which is greater than NJDOT's recommendation of 24 feet. And I believe it was previously testified that the police department did review this prior to the hearing and concluded that they had no objections on the revisions. Now, to accommodate this shift, we eliminated the divide and curb island within the driveway, as well as the freestanding sign, which previously required a variance. So not only were we able to provide additional separation between the two driveways, but we were able to eliminate sign variance with the revised plans. Now, Morris Avenue is a county roadway, and an application has been filed with the Union County Planning Board. The latest plans that were submitted to the city also included revisions to address minor comments by the county, which included to provide brand-new curbing and sidewalk along the entire property frontage. Now, as you move into the site, we are providing compliant 24-foot wide drive aisles for two-way movements to access the surface parking spaces at the rear of the building, which will be designated for visitors only. Directional signage is proposed as you enter the site to direct visitors.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Worry. For visitors only, except for the two spaces that are designated for valet only.
Correct, for visitors to drop off their cars for the valet. Okay. So just going back to that, directional signage is proposed as you enter the site to direct visitors to the surface parking spaces who may not be familiar with the development. And as Mr. Weber just asked, there are two surface valet parking spaces to allow for visitors to quickly drop off their car for the valet. Now, residents and visitors of the development can also utilize the roundabout to drop off their car for the 24-hour valet service. And sticking with the roundabout, per ADA standards, at least one compliant passenger loading zone is required at vehicle drop-off and pickup areas. So as such, we are providing an ADA compliant 8-foot wide by 20-foot long loading zone and associated 5-foot wide access aisle adjacent to the front door lobby. Now, access to the underground parking garage is through the proposed ramp at the rear of the site that slopes down to the lower level, which will be utilized by the valet only. And for reference, at the beginning of the ramp, the elevation is approximately 2 feet lower than the adjacent property line. At the midpoint of the ramp, the elevation is approximately 5 feet lower than the adjacent property. And at the bottom of the ramp, the elevation is approximately 8 feet lower than the adjacent property. So as cars are being brought down by the valet, as they start to pass the midpoint of the ramp, they will be completely screened from the adjacent property line. And that does not include the newly proposed fence and evergreen screen that we'll talk shortly.
So when you say they'll be totally screened, they'll be screened just by the fact that the driveway is dipping down and you'll lose sight of them. On top of that, you'll have the 6-foot fence with the landscaping as well.
That is correct. So for parking, overall, 138 parking spaces are proposed, which is 41 more than the RSI's requirement that requires 97. A majority of these parking spaces are proposed within the underground parking garage, so they will be completely out of sight. There are 15 surface parking spaces proposed that includes one ADA space. And additional information on the parking, visitors, and valet will be provided by our traffic engineer. Now, this project is classified as a major development and will comply with both the City of Summit and NJDEP's stormwater requirements. And for clarity, a major development is any project that proposes more than 1 acre of disturbance or increases impervious coverage by more than 1/4 acre. Now, as a benefit to being a major development, under proposed conditions, stormwater generated by the site will be fully captured and detained to meet the required flow reductions by the use of 2 underground infiltration basins, improving existing drainage conditions.
I'm sorry again. Do you want to go to the site plan that shows the management of the stormwater?
Sure. I believe it's actually shown on this plan. There's one located in the northern corner in that grass area in the north corner of the building of the site, as well as the second basin being within the proposed driveway. So moving on, vehicular-related.
We'll just wait for Ms. Alfonso
sure.
to show where in the proposed driveway. Thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Worry.
should be just a black box.
Thank you. Thank you.
So moving on, vehicular-related impervious surfaces are also reduced by approximately 5,000 square feet as part of this development, so we'll be improving water quality on site. And in addition to this, stormwater pretreatment devices are also proposed to remove pollutants for 80% TSS removal prior to discharging to the existing conveyance system within Morris Avenue.
What's TSS? Or-
Total suspended top solids. Lastly, as noted in Mr. Dewar's engineering letter, the applicant will be required to submit a grading permit prior to construction as more than 600 square feet of disturbance is proposed. Now, moving on to landscaping, a brand-new 6-foot fence is proposed along the rear and side property lines. And per discussions with the neighbors along Plain Street, the fence along the rear property line will be a brand-new solid cedar board-on-board fence to provide an immediate screening of the property. This will essentially replace the old fence that is there today.
If I can, on the fence, I think that on one of the plans in your construction details, and I'm sorry if I didn't point this out to you, you showed that it would be pressure-treated posts and slats. So I'm looking at sheet number 12. They show the board-on-board, posts and slats to be pressure-treated lumber. So the slats will be cedar?
That's correct.
And the posts will be pressure-treated?
That's correct.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
No problem. So moving on, the solid fence will extend along a portion of the side property line to screen headlights from the vehicles exiting the underground parking garage. This was recommended by Mr. Dewar at the previous hearing. We do have an exhibit tonight that depicts this. Ms. Alfonso, if you could bring up the garage ramp exhibit.
While she's doing that, oh, that's not the one, Ms. Alfonso. There was a subsequent one.
There was an updated one.
While she was doing that, when you're a major development and you're not just doing stormwater management, you're actually going to treat quality. You're going to deal with the suspended solids, the dirt that goes in the water.
That is correct. So just as part of the development, we're actually reducing vehicular-related impervious surfaces, which is a benefit to water quality on its own, just by doing the project in itself. In addition to that, we're also proposing the pretreatment devices for 80% TSS removal rate. So we're actually going a bit above and beyond from a water quality standpoint.
This is not inexpensive, is it?
They can get significantly expensive, yes. I do have.
Go ahead.
Mr. Weber, we're just watching the time generally here.
I know, so was I, Mr.
10:30
Chairman.
will mean 3 hours, much beyond that. I don't have enough cupcakes for my board to go a second round, so you
And
can
I
help me
believe that-
watch the time.
And I believe that the board still has other work that it has to attend to besides this application.
Board's work is never done, so we just appreciate if you can find a logical stopping point, allowing at least 10 more minutes. The board would be appreciative.
I think we go through circulation, and then we'll touch on landscaping, and then at that point, I think we're on to lighting. I think before we get to lighting, we can cut it at
You'll see
landscaping.
my stare intensify if we've gone there, so we'll work on this together. Please, Mr. Ward.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so this exhibit is entitled Garage Ramp Exhibit. It's dated with today's date of May 16th, 2022, at a scale of 1 inch equals 10 feet, and north again is to the top left corner of the page. Now, this is a profile view of an SUV exiting the lower garage ramp and traveling up the ramp that would be facing the Promenade development to the east. Now, as depicted, even if an SUV had its high beams on, which would be a worst-case scenario, as headlights are usually depicted to be pointed downward in a downward direction, the solid board-on-board fence will sufficiently screen the headlights. So we just wanted to point out to the board and the engineer that this is something that we had reviewed and made sure that it complies.
Can you over here in the public see this illustration? Thank you.
And then moving on to the landscaping that's proposed.
Sure.
And I think that would
We can go-
include the civil engineering for tonight.
Ms. Alfonso, if it's all right, we can go back to the site plan rendering. So sticking with the fence really quick, the fence along the side property lines will transition to a 6-foot-high black aluminum picket fence. And as noted in Ms. Anderson's review letter, we removed a portion of the fence within the front yard, which eliminated the need for a variance. So this was the second variance that we were able to eliminate with our revised plans. Now, a 7.5-foot wide buffer is proposed along the rear property line to the proposed retaining wall of the ramp. This buffer includes a row of 28 green giant arborvitae, and these evergreen trees are known to be great screening, which will provide a screen all year round. They will be 8 feet tall at the time of planting, and once established, they are very fast growers and can grow up to 2 to 3 feet every year until they reach a mature height of 30 to 40 feet in height. In addition, there are utility poles and low-hanging wires at the rear of the property that are a bit of an eyesore and service the existing buildings. These will also be removed as part of the development, so we're really trying to clean up the area at the rear of the property.
Now, you have the compass in the upper right-hand corner of the exhibit, and that shows a southern exposure. Will that be sufficient light for these evergreen plantings to thrive as you're describing them?
Yes, it will.
And what about the irrigation? How will they be watered?
There will be irrigation in place for this development. As for additional plantings, we're proposing red maple street trees along the property frontage, as well as perimeter building plantings, evergreen shrubs along the north and side property lines, as well as other plantings within the surface parking islands.
Have you had an opportunity to review the report of John Linson in response to these most recent plans?
Yes.
And what was the date of that report, if you have it available in front of you? And I have it as May 5th, 2022. And if I could ask you to read it.
Sure. I have it right here, actually. So the review letter notes, on the tree planting detail, burlap and wire cages should be completely removed. Trunk flares should be exposed above grade. Otherwise, the landscape plan is fine. So for the first part of the comment, there's no problem for us to update our detail to comply. And second comment, we believe that there's no other comments on the landscape plan.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that we conclude the testimony of Mr. Worry at this point, that we hold off for questions until he is recalled. We will recall him at the next hearing, and we will continue the civil engineering at that period of time.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Worry. Mr. Chair, I just have one comment. And just to confirm, so when you look at the orange detail for the building, it doesn't really show that there is an overhang going to that courtyard. So you really can't, looking at that, it looks like there's a notch cut out on the upper right-hand corner of the building. That's not really the case. So maybe in the future renderings, if you could outline where the building limits are.
That's no problem. It's hard to see, obviously, with the pavement below it, but there is a black outline of the canopy. But we can make that stand out a little bit better with our next rendering. But that's really just to show the circulation underneath the canopy. But we can outline that in a different color to try and get it to stick out a little better.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Howard. Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. Anything you'd like to say, just in conclusion, to contextualize this evening and what we can expect in the next meeting?
I would ask that this be carried to the next available meeting. And at that period of time, we will recall the civil engineer, Josh Worry, to conclude his testimony and then be able to answer any questions. Then we would have the traffic engineer and the professional planner. So to the extent that the board can give us additional time and attention for this application, we should be able to conclude it at the next hearing. Knock on wood.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weber. So with that, the intention of the board is to, and I'll offer this especially to the members of the interested public, the intention is to carry this case to June 20th. Mr. Weber, I assume your or neighbors want to attend, reach out to Chris Nicola, go to the city's website. We'll make sure that adequate notice is, of course, published, but you can always reach out to Chris directly. He'll confirm for you when the next meeting is going to be held. So with that, we need a vote, Chris, yes?
Yeah, we need a motion and a second to carry it to June 20th without further notice.
Motion?
Moved.
All right.
Second.
All right, well done. Mr. Yuko and Ms.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none.
All right, excellent. And then, thank you very much, Rob. And Chris had noted, maybe you want to just explain resolutions real quick?
Yeah, none of them are ready, so we're not voting on any of them today. So we're getting out almost on time.
And there are no minutes either, correct?
Correct. They'll be ready for the next meeting. I've already reached out to Rosenberg and Associates.
Okay. All right, with that, we will adjourn and convene next on June 6th.
Oh, boy.
You are released.